The explosion tore through the eastern wall of forward operating base Talon 7, sending debris and smoke across the compound. Commander Draven dropped to the floor as his office windows shattered, glass raining down on his forearms. His communication device crackled with panicked voices from every section of the base. "They're inside the perimeter," Lieutenant Kira shouted through the channel. "Krythan Syndicate forces at least 200 strong." Draven pulled himself up and rushed to the command center. The hallways filled with soldiers running to defensive positions, energy weapons fired in the distance, their distinctive whine echoing through the corridors. By the time he reached the operations room, half his command staff lay wounded or dead. The tactical display showed red markers spreading through the base like a disease. "Sir, they've taken the armory," reported a young officer, his scales turning pale with fear. "They're pushing toward this building now." "Pull everyone back to the secondary positions," Draven ordered. "Establish a defensive line around the medical bay and the communications hub." For the next 6 hours, the coalition forces fought desperately to hold their ground. The Krythan Syndicate had planned their assault perfectly. They knew every weak point, every blind spot in the defenses. Draven watched helplessly as section after section fell to the enemy. His soldiers were brave, well-trained, but they were losing. "Commander," Kira said quietly, appearing at his side. Blood streaked across her uniform. "We've lost 60% of our forces. The Krythan have taken the command center. If we don't get reinforcements within 12 hours, we'll have to surrender." Draven felt his heart sink. The nearest coalition fleet was 3 days away. No help would arrive in time through normal channels. He looked at the tactical display again, then at the computer terminal beside it. There was one option he had avoided thinking about. "Get me a secure line to Earth Command," he said slowly. Kira's eyes widened. "Sir, are you certain?" "The humans, they—" "I know what they are," Draven interrupted. "I've read the reports. Every commander has. But we're out of options." He had seen the files on human military operations. The footage from the borderland conflict where human soldiers had fought for 72 hours straight without rest. The reports from the siege of Haven Station where a human team had infiltrated an impregnable fortress and eliminated the enemy leadership in total darkness. The psychological profiles that labeled humans as apex predators who had climbed to the top of their planet's food chain through persistence, adaptability, and a frightening willingness to sacrifice themselves. Other species feared human soldiers. They fought like machines but thought like artists. They could be perfectly still for hours, then explode into violence with shocking speed. They operated in conditions that would kill most species and seemed to prefer fighting at night, when their prey couldn't see them coming. "Send the distress call," Draven ordered. "Request immediate tactical support." Kira's hand shook as she entered the codes. Within minutes, a response came back. Help was coming. "Estimated arrival 4 hours. 4 hours?" Another officer gasped. "That's impossible. Earth is 2 weeks away at maximum speed." "They must have had a ship nearby," Kira said, though her voice carried doubt. "Some kind of rapid response vessel. When the human ship arrived, it didn't look like a military vessel. It was small, dark, and moved through space with unsettling silence. It docked at the outer landing pad, far from the fighting. Draven and Kira went to meet them, flanked by 4 guards. 6 humans emerged from the ship. They wore black uniforms that seemed to absorb light. Their faces were calm, almost relaxed. The leader stepped forward and extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. "Captain Owen Blake, Earth Special Operations. This is Sergeant Rita Cross and our team." His voice was steady, professional. "We understand you have a situation. The Krythan Syndicate has taken our command center," Draven explained, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "They outnumber us 3 to 1. Our defensive lines are collapsing." Blake nodded and looked at the base, his eyes scanning the buildings with mechanical precision. "How many hostiles?" "Approximately 200. "And how many civilians on base?" 300. "Mostly support staff and medical personnel." Blake turned to his team and spoke in quick, clipped sentences. They responded with nods and began unloading equipment from their ship. Draven noticed their weapons were different from Coalition standard issue. Everything was designed to be quiet. Even their boots made almost no sound on the metal deck. "We'll need current base schematics, enemy positions, and a secure observation point," Blake said. "We'll begin operations after nightfall." "Nightfall?" Kira asked. "But that's when most species have reduced visibility. Wouldn't daytime be better?" Blake looked at her, and something in his expression made her step back. It wasn't cruelty or anger. It was something older, something that lived in the dark places of evolution. Nighttime is when we work best, Lieutenant. Draven's security team watched the humans with barely concealed fear. One of the guards, a veteran of 20 campaigns, whispered to his commander, "Sir, I've heard stories about human special forces. They say these soldiers aren't fully sane. That Earth only sends the ones who don't value their own lives." "Quiet," Draven snapped. But he understood the fear. Humans had a reputation across the galaxy. They were the species that had survived an ice age, that had conquered a planet full of predators larger and stronger than themselves, that had fought wars against each other for thousands of years before even reaching space. When humans went to war, they brought millions of years of survival instinct with them. Blake's team set up in an observation room overlooking the captured command center. They worked in silence, assembling equipment that Draven didn't recognize. When the sun began to set over Talon 7, Blake checked his weapon one final time and looked at his team. "Standard insertion protocol. Rita, you're on Overwatch. The rest of you with me. Rules of engagement: silent until impossible, then overwhelming. Mission priority: neutralize enemy leadership and create chaos. Secondary: minimize civilian casualties. Tertiary: our own survival." Draven felt cold. Tertiary. Their own survival was third priority. What kind of military put their soldiers' lives below the mission objectives? As darkness fell completely over the base, Blake's team moved out. One moment they were standing in the room, the next they had melted into shadows. Draven stared at the empty space where they had been. "Where did they go?" he asked. Kira checked her sensors. "I don't know, sir. I've lost their signals completely." Somewhere in the darkness outside, 6 human soldiers had become ghosts. The Krithan Syndicate forces had no idea that their worst nightmare had just begun hunting them. 3 hours passed in tense silence. Draven paced the observation room while Kira monitored every sensor array still under Coalition control. The human ship sat quiet on the landing pad, and Sergeant Rita Cross remained at her position with a long rifle that seemed too large for practical use. She hadn't moved in over an hour, barely seemed to breathe. "This is insane," muttered one of the Coalition officers. 6 soldiers against 200. They'll be captured or killed within the hour. "Contact," Kira suddenly announced. Krithan patrol on the north perimeter just went silent. All 5 soldiers, no distress call, no weapons fire. Draven moved to her station. "Show me." The screen displayed the last known positions of the Krithan patrol. They had been walking their route, maintaining regular communication intervals. Then nothing. The silence was absolute. "Check for equipment malfunction," Draven ordered. "All systems show normal function, sir." They just stopped responding. 10 minutes later, another patrol went dark. Then another. Each time there were no sounds of combat, no emergency transmissions, no evidence of what had happened. The Krithan forces were simply disappearing into the night. Inside the captured command center, the Krithan commander named Voss stared at his tactical display with growing unease. 7 patrols had failed to report in. He had sent investigation teams to their last known locations and found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. His soldiers had vanished as if they had never existed. "Sir, the perimeter teams are requesting permission to move in pairs instead of standard formations," reported his second officer. "They're frightened." "Frightened of what?" Voss snapped. "Coalition forces are contained. We control this base. The humans have arrived, sir." Voss felt his blood chill. He had heard the stories like every military commander in the sector. Humans were the species that other species warned their soldiers about. They were hunters who could track prey for days without rest. They could see in darkness that blinded other races. They moved through hostile territory like water through cracks, finding paths that shouldn't exist. "Increase patrol density," he ordered. "Use thermal scanners. Maintain constant communication. If anyone sees anything, I want immediate reports." But the disappearances continued. A guard post went silent. A supply team vanished between buildings. A communications relay operator screamed once and then nothing. Voss watched his force count drop on the tactical display. 200 soldiers had become 180, then 160. "We need to consolidate," his second officer urged. "Pull everyone into the command center. Establish a defensive perimeter we can actually hold." "Do it," Voss agreed. As Krithan soldiers retreated toward the command center, they found messages left behind, scratched into walls, burned into metal with laser cutters. Simple words in Galactic Standard. "We see you. You can't see us. The psychological effect was devastating. Krythan soldiers who had fought in a dozen campaigns found themselves jumping at shadows. They fired at movements that turned out to be wind-blown debris. They reported contacts that didn't exist. Fear spread through their ranks like poison. From her overwatch position, Rita Cross observed everything through her rifle scope. The weapon was equipped with advanced thermal imaging and extreme magnification. She could see individual soldiers a kilometer away as clearly as if they stood beside her. She whispered into her communication device, feeding information to Blake's team. Target package moving from Building 7 to Command Center. 8 hostiles, armed with plasma rifles, taking the eastern route. Somewhere in the darkness, Blake acknowledged with a single click on his radio. No words needed. The team had trained together for years. They communicated through gestures, sounds, and an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements. Blake and his team moved through the base like smoke. They used the shadows between buildings, the gaps in sensor coverage, the brief moments when guards looked the wrong direction. Their training had taught them to become part of the environment, to think like predators stalking prey through tall grass. One of Blake's soldiers, Specialist Yuki Park, reached a Krythan guard post. 2 enemy soldiers stood watch, their thermal sensors sweeping the area. Yuki waited perfectly still 20 meters away. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and became just another piece of cold equipment in the night. When both guards looked in the opposite direction, she moved. 3 silent steps closed the distance. Her knife was designed to disrupt nervous systems instantly. Both guards dropped without a sound. She dragged their bodies into shadows and whispered into her radio. Post 9 clear. Blake's team was rewriting the rules of modern warfare. Other species fought with technology, with overwhelming firepower, with numerical superiority. Humans fought with patience, silence, and an intimate understanding of fear. They knew that a frightened enemy made mistakes. A confused enemy wasted resources. A paranoid enemy destroyed itself from within. Lieutenant Kira watched the enemy movements on her sensor display. The Krythan forces were collapsing inward, abandoning their captured territory, focusing entirely on defending the command center. They're retreating, she said in disbelief. The humans haven't even engaged them directly yet. Draven understood what he was witnessing. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a hunt. Blake's team was herding the Krythan forces exactly where they wanted them, creating chaos and confusion, breaking their morale before the real fight even began. Commander, I'm detecting movement near the power station, Kira reported. It's Blake. He's alone, placing charges on the primary generators. Why would he destroy the power? Draven wondered aloud. The answer came 30 seconds later when the base plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, providing minimal illumination in critical areas. But most of the base became a maze of shadows and blind corners, perfect hunting ground for creatures that evolved to see in the dark. Inside the command center, Voss watched his tactical displays die. Backup systems came online, but they were limited. His thermal sensors, motion detectors, and communication arrays all operated at reduced capacity. His soldiers called out in alarm as darkness pressed in around them. Sir, we're blind, someone shouted. We can't see anything beyond 10 meters. Voss activated his personal communicator. All units, night vision equipment now. Establish overlapping fields of fire. Nobody moves alone. But humans had been hunting in the dark for hundreds of thousands of years. They had evolved complex eyes that gathered every photon of available light. They had developed patience that allowed them to wait motionless until their prey relaxed. They understood fear better than any predator because they had once been prey themselves, hunted by larger creatures in the African night. Blake's voice came over the Krythan command frequency. He had somehow hacked their communications. When he spoke, his words were calm, almost conversational. You have 12 hours to surrender. Release the command center and evacuate the base. If you're still here at dawn, we stop being nice. Voss felt terror grip his hearts. This was nice. Nearly 40 of his soldiers had vanished without a trace, and the humans considered this a gentle approach? Outside in the darkness, Blake smiled. The night had just begun. Dawn never came for the Krythan forces trapped in the command center. Blake had destroyed the power grid's timing systems, leaving the base in perpetual darkness. Emergency lighting provided small islands of dim illumination, but the spaces between remained as black as deep space. Voss hadn't slept in 36 hours. Neither had his soldiers. They stood guard in rotating shifts, weapons ready, scanning every shadow for movement. But the humans didn't attack. They simply waited, letting exhaustion do their work for them. "Sir, 3 more soldiers are showing signs of combat fatigue," the medical officer reported. "They're seeing things that aren't there. Hearing sounds. I need to sedate them or they'll become a danger to others." Voss looked at his force roster. He had started with 200 trained soldiers. Now he had 112, and half of those were barely functional due to stress and sleep deprivation. The humans had killed maybe 20 of his troops. The rest had simply vanished, presumably captured. The casualties were minimal compared to the psychological damage. "How long can humans operate without sleep?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Reports vary, sir. Some accounts claim they can remain combat effective for up to 72 hours. They have a chemical in their bodies called adrenaline that keeps them alert during extreme stress." 72 hours. Voss had been awake for 36 and could barely think straight. His species needed regular rest cycles. Most species did, but humans had evolved to chase prey across endless distances, to track wounded animals for days until they collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies were built for endurance that bordered on the supernatural. From his observation post, Draven watched Blake's team through long-range optics. They had been in constant operation since landing, moving, fighting, planning. 36 hours of continuous work. Yet when he focused on Blake's face, the human looked alert, focused, and completely in control. "Lieutenant Kira, analyze human physiological data if you can access it," Draven ordered. Kira pulled up Earth medical files. "Their biology is fascinating, sir. Their bodies have multiple redundant systems. 2 kidneys, 2 lungs, backup circulation pathways. They can lose massive amounts of blood and continue functioning. Their pain tolerance is exceptionally high, regulated by internal chemicals, and their healing rate is remarkable compared to most species. They're built to take damage," Draven realized. "Yes, sir. Earth was a dangerous planet. Predators, diseases, environmental hazards. Humans evolved to survive conditions that would kill most of us." On the battlefield, Blake's team had moved to the next phase of their operation. They had identified the Krythan leadership's location within the command center. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures in the central operations room. The problem was getting inside. The Krythan had established overlapping fields of fire covering every approach. Blake studied the building layout on his tactical display. He had been staring at it for 2 hours, completely motionless, analyzing every detail. His team waited silently. They trusted his judgment. If he said there was a way in, there was a way in. "Rita, mark designated targets," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. From her overwatch position, Rita adjusted her rifle. The weapon fired specialized ammunition that could punch through armor at extreme ranges. She had been lying in the same position for 16 hours, waiting for this moment. Her muscles ached, her back cramped, but her hands remained steady. Target 1 marked. West entrance guard post Alpha. Target 2 marked. East entrance guard post Beta. Target 3 marked. North entrance guard post Gamma. Blake waited. Patience was a weapon that humans had mastered over millennia. In ancient times, human hunters would track an animal for days, matching its pace exactly, never rushing, never giving up. They would follow until the prey was too exhausted to run anymore. Blake had that same patience in his blood. Inside the command center, a Krythan soldier named Kelso stared into the darkness beyond his post. He had been on guard duty for 6 hours. His eyes hurt from straining against the shadows. His mind played tricks on him, showing movement where there was none. "I need a break," he told his partner. "Just 5 minutes. We can't leave the post unmanned, but please. I can't focus anymore. Everything looks like it's moving." His partner hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. No more. Kelso left his position and walked toward the interior rooms. He had barely taken 10 steps when he heard a sound like fabric tearing. He turned back and saw his partner crumpling to the ground, a neat hole through his armor where his heart had been. The shot had come from somewhere outside, over a kilometer away in the darkness. Kelso opened his mouth to scream, but Blake's team was already moving. They had waited for exactly this moment when the guard posts changed shifts. When attention wavered for just a second, 3 simultaneous shots from Rita's rifle eliminated the external guards. Blake's team sprinted forward, covering the distance in seconds. Kelso managed to trigger the alarm before a human soldier reached him. The base erupted with warning sirens. Krythan forces rushed to defensive positions. But Blake's team had already breached the perimeter. What happened next became legendary in military circles. Blake's team moved through the command center like they could see through walls. They anticipated every defense, every ambush. When Krythan soldiers set up a trap, humans somehow knew and avoided it. When they established a firing line, humans attacked from an unexpected angle. Kira watched the battle unfold on her sensors. How are they doing this? She wondered. It's like they know what the Krythan will do before they do it. Draven remembered something from the human military files. Humans had a unique cognitive ability. Their brains were wired for social thinking, for understanding other minds, for predicting behavior. On Earth, they had called it empathy. In warfare, it became tactical precognition. Blake could think like his enemy. He understood how Voss would react to threats, where he would position forces, what tactics he would employ. Blake had studied Krythan military doctrine, their cultural psychology, their instinctive responses to stress. He was fighting an enemy he understood completely while remaining incomprehensible to them. The battle lasted 4 minutes. Blake's team killed 8 Krythan soldiers, wounded 15 and captured Voss and his command staff. The rest surrendered when they realized their leadership had been neutralized. But the cost was steep. Specialist Leo Grant had taken a plasma round to his chest while covering the team's advance. The wound was fatal. His armor had melted into his flesh and internal organs were too damaged to repair even with advanced medical technology. Blake knelt beside Leo in the darkness. The young soldier looked up at him and smiled weakly. "Did we get them, sir?" "We got them, Leo. Mission accomplished." "Good." Leo's breathing became labored. "Tell my brother I made it count." Blake held his soldier's hand as life faded. When Leo stopped breathing, Blake closed the young man's eyes and stood up. His face showed no emotion, but his team knew. They had lost one of their own. "Secure the prisoners," Blake ordered, his voice steady. "Rita, begin extraction protocol. We're going home." The Krythan forces watched in confusion as the humans continued working despite their obvious grief. They functioned through pain that would break most species. It was this ability more than anything else that made them terrifying. Coalition forces moved through the command center carefully, weapons ready. They found Krythan soldiers sitting against walls staring at nothing. Some were wounded, receiving treatment from human medics who worked with efficient precision. Others were simply broken, their minds unable to process what had happened to them. Voss sat in restraints, his hands bound behind his back. Draven approached him slowly. The Krythan commander looked up with empty eyes. "We had every advantage," Voss said quietly. "Numbers, position, preparation time. We knew this base better than you did. How did 6 soldiers defeat 200? Draven had no answer. He simply gestured for guards to take Voss to a holding cell. Outside the command center, Blake's team prepared Leo's body for transport. They had wrapped him in a coalition flag, a gesture of respect for the base they had saved. Blake filled out paperwork with mechanical precision, documenting the action, recording casualties, completing the administrative tasks that followed every mission. "Captain Blake," Draven said, approaching carefully, "I wanted to thank you. Without your team, we would have lost this base and everyone on it." Blake looked at him with eyes that held too much experience for someone who appeared so young. "Just doing our job, Commander. Your soldier, Leo, he died saving my people. That deserves more than just a job." Leo knew the risks. "We all do." Blake's voice remained flat, professional. "Special operations isn't for everyone. You volunteer knowing you might not come home." Kira joined them, carrying data tablets. "I've been reviewing the mission recordings, Captain. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to understand how you accomplished this. What did you find?" "Your team operated for 42 consecutive hours. You covered 20 kilometers through hostile territory. You eliminated or captured enemy forces while sustaining minimal casualties until the final assault. The mathematics don't make sense. 6 soldiers shouldn't be able to accomplish what you did." Blake almost smiled. "Mathematics assumes all soldiers are equal. We're not. Earth Special Forces spend years in training. We learn to operate in any environment, any condition. We study enemy psychology, tactics, culture. We train our bodies to function past normal limits. When we deploy, we're not just soldiers. We're weapons built specifically for impossible missions." "But Leo died," Kira said softly. "How can you continue working after losing one of your team?" Blake's expression finally changed. Pain flickered across his face, quickly suppressed. "We compartmentalize, Lieutenant. During the mission, emotions get locked away. We process them later when people aren't depending on us. It's not healthy probably, but it's necessary. That's horrifying, Kira whispered. War is horrifying, Blake replied. We just happen to be very good at it. Rita Cross approached, having completed her equipment checks. She looked exhausted, her face pale beneath the dirt and sweat. Ship's ready, Captain. We should move out before the next crisis hits. Agreed. Blake turned to Draven. Commander, your base is secure. The Krathan Syndicate forces have been neutralized. I'm leaving detailed reports on their tactics and how they breached your defenses. Learn from it. Will you stay for Leo's memorial service? Draven asked. We'd like to honor him properly. Blake shook his head. Earth Command needs us elsewhere. There's always another mission. But thank you for the offer. As the human team prepared to depart, Coalition soldiers watched them with a mixture of fear and respect. These weren't the monsters they had expected. They were professionals doing an ugly job with brutal efficiency. They laughed quietly among themselves, sharing private jokes that eased the tension. They checked each other's equipment with familiar ease. They looked like any military unit except for the shadows in their eyes. Captain, called one of Blake's soldiers, a woman named Harper. Leo's personal effects are secured. His family will receive them along with his commendations. Good. Make sure Command knows he died well. He saved civilian lives. That matters. The team boarded their ship, moving with the same silent efficiency they had shown throughout the operation. Within minutes they were gone, disappearing into space as quietly as they had arrived. Draven stood on the landing pad watching their ship vanish. Lieutenant Kira, I want you to compile everything we learned about human military operations. Every tactic, every technique, every insight. Send it to Coalition Command, sir. Other bases need to know. If humans are going to be our allies, we need to understand how they fight. We need to know why they're effective and why they're terrifying. Kira nodded and began her work. Over the next several days, she interviewed Coalition soldiers who had witnessed the human operation. She reviewed sensor data, studied battle recordings, and analyzed every aspect of what Blake's team had accomplished. The report she produced became required reading for Coalition military officers across the galaxy. It detailed human capabilities with clinical precision. Humans operated effectively in near-total darkness using advanced optics and superior natural vision. They sustained combat operations for 72 hours or more without rest. They used psychological warfare to degrade enemy morale before engaging directly. They accepted casualties as inevitable rather than aberrant, planning operations with the assumption that some team members wouldn't survive. They compartmentalized emotions during combat, functioning through grief and trauma that would incapacitate most species. But Kira's report included something else. Observations about human nature that went beyond military capability. She described how Blake's team had treated wounded enemies with care, how they had moved civilians to safety before engaging hostiles, how they had mourned their fallen comrade with genuine emotion. She noted that human soldiers weren't cruel or sadistic. They were simply extremely effective survivors who had learned to weaponize every advantage their evolution provided. Humans are apex predators, she wrote in her conclusion, but they're also social creatures with strong empathy and moral frameworks. They don't enjoy killing. They simply accept it as necessary when protecting others. This combination of lethal capability and ethical constraint makes them valuable allies and terrifying enemies. The report spread through Coalition military channels. Officers read it with growing unease. Some called for limits on human military involvement. Others argued humans were exactly what the Coalition needed. Soldiers capable of operations other species couldn't accomplish. 3 weeks after the incident at Talon 7, Draven received a communication from Coalition High Command. They wanted to establish a formal training exchange program with Earth. Human special forces would teach Coalition soldiers their techniques while learning Coalition tactics in return. Draven approved the program immediately. He understood something that many others didn't. Humans weren't going away. They were part of the galactic community now. Better to understand them, work with them, and learn from them than to fear them from a distance. But in quiet moments, Draven still remembered watching Blake's team vanish into the darkness. He remembered the fear in Krathan soldiers' voices as they realized invisible predators were hunting them. He remembered Leo dying with a smile, satisfied that his sacrifice meant something. Humans were heroes and nightmares wrapped together. The galaxy would need time to accept both aspects. Until then, alien soldiers would continue to dread the words that meant help had arrived. Human special forces are inbound. The memorial service for Specialist Leo Grant took place at Coalition Forward Operating Base Talon 7, 3 days after the battle. Blake's team had left, but Draven insisted on honoring the fallen human soldier properly. Coalition forces gathered in the main assembly area, which had been repaired enough to host the ceremony. Draven stood at the podium, looking at the assembled soldiers. Many species were represented. Sistheri with their 4 arms, Aventi with their scaled skin, Corvani with their compound eyes. All had fought together to retake the base. All had witnessed what 6 human soldiers accomplished in 42 hours. We gathered to remember Specialist Leo Grant of Earth, Draven began. A soldier who traveled across the galaxy to save people he had never met. He died holding a position that allowed his team to complete their mission. Without his sacrifice, many of us wouldn't be standing here today. A holographic image of Leo appeared above the podium. Young face, easy smile, eyes that held determination. He looked barely old enough to be a soldier. Kira had researched his background. Leo had been 23 years old. He had joined Earth military at 18, volunteered for Special Forces training at 20, and completed 3 deployments before dying on Talon 7. 23, Kira whispered to herself. So young. But humans matured quickly compared to most species. They had shorter lifespans, compressed life cycles. What took other species 50 years to learn, humans absorbed in 20. They lived fast, learned fast, and died young by galactic standards. After the formal ceremony ended, Kira found herself talking with some of the soldiers who had witnessed the battle. A Corvani engineer named Brick shared his observations. I saw one of the humans climbing outside the command center, Brick said, his compound eyes reflecting light strangely. He was moving across a wall 50 meters above the ground. No safety equipment, just his hands and feet. If he had fallen, he would have died. But he moved like he was walking on flat ground. Humans evolved as climbing primates, Kira explained. They're comfortable at heights that terrify most of us. But why take that risk? There were safer approaches. Because the safe approaches were defended, humans consider acceptable risk differently than we do. They calculate mission success against personal danger and often choose the mission. A Sistheri medic joined the conversation. I treated some of the wounded Krathen. They were traumatized beyond anything I've seen. Some kept repeating that the humans were everywhere, that they could see through walls, that they knew what the Krathen would do before they did it. One soldier claimed a human had stood perfectly still for 3 hours, never moving. Barely breathing, just waiting for the right moment to strike. Kira nodded. Human hunters used to track prey for days. They would follow animal herds across enormous distances, waiting for one to show weakness. That patience is part of their nature. It's unnatural, the medic said quietly. We're supposed to be the advanced species. We have technology, civilization, culture, but humans fight like animals. Elegant, efficient, terrifying animals. Maybe that's what makes them effective, Kira suggested. They never forgot where they came from. Most species left their predator instincts behind when they developed civilization. Humans integrated theirs. They're civilized predators. The conversations continued throughout the day. Coalition soldiers shared stories, compared observations, tried to understand what they had witnessed. The humans had become a puzzle that everyone wanted to solve. That evening, Kira received a communication from Earth Command. Captain Blake had filed his after-action report. As a courtesy, they were sharing it with coalition forces who had been involved in the operation. Kira downloaded the file and began reading. Blake's report was precise, clinical, and deeply disturbing. He documented every decision with cold logic. When describing Leo's death, he noted that the specialist had drawn enemy fire, creating an opening for the team's advance. He calculated that Leo's sacrifice had reduced overall casualties by an estimated 30%. The tone suggested this was an acceptable trade, but attached to the formal report was a personal letter. Blake had written it to Leo's family. In this letter, the cold professional disappeared. Blake described Leo as brave, loyal, and selfless. He wrote about how Leo had made the team laugh during long missions. He mentioned how Leo always volunteered for the most dangerous assignments because he wanted to protect his teammates. He promised Leo's parents that their son had died quickly, that he hadn't suffered, that his last words were about completing the mission successfully. Kira read both documents, and finally understood. The clinical report was how humans survived war. The personal letter was how they remained human. They separated the two aspects deliberately, using professional distance as armor against the horror of what they did. She thought about Blake's face when Leo died. That moment of pain before the mask came back. Humans felt everything other species felt. They just refused to let those feelings stop them from functioning. It was simultaneously admirable and heartbreaking. A week after the battle, Draven called Kira to his office. "I've received new orders from Coalition Command. They're establishing a joint training facility on Station Harmony. Human Special Forces will teach Coalition soldiers their techniques. You've been selected to coordinate the program." Kira felt her heart's race. "Sir, I'm not qualified. I'm an intelligence officer, not a combat trainer. You understand humans better than anyone else on this base. You've studied them, interviewed survivors of their operations, analyzed their tactics. Command wants someone who can bridge the gap between human and coalition military cultures. That's you. When do I leave?" "Transport departs in 3 days. Pack for an extended deployment." Station Harmony was a massive facility orbiting a neutral world. It served as a diplomatic hub and training center for coalition forces. When Kira arrived, she found the station in chaos. Human military advisors had arrived a week earlier, and coalition soldiers were still adjusting to their presence. The humans moved through the station like ghosts, silent and efficient. They woke early, trained hard, and maintained standards that seemed impossible. Coalition soldiers watched them with a mixture of respect and fear. Kira met with the lead human instructor, a veteran named Colonel Sarah Palmer. Palmer had gray hair and scars that spoke of decades in combat. Her eyes held the same shadows Kira had seen in Blake's. "Lieutenant Kira," Palmer said, shaking hands in the human fashion. "I've read your report on the Talon 7 operation. Impressive analysis, thank you, Colonel. I tried to be objective. You succeeded. Most reports about human special forces either glorify us as superhuman or demonize us as monsters. You saw us as we are, soldiers doing a hard job with tools that frighten people. Can coalition forces learn to fight like humans?" Kira asked. Palmer considered the question carefully. "Some techniques, yes. Tactical thinking, operational planning, equipment use. But the psychological aspects? The willingness to accept casualties, the ability to function through trauma, the patience to wait days for the right moment? Those are harder. They come from millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of warfare. We can teach the skills. The mindset takes longer." Over the following weeks, Kira watched coalition soldiers train under human instruction. The humans were patient teachers but demanding. They expected perfection because mistakes cost lives. Some coalition soldiers thrived. Others couldn't handle the intensity and dropped out. But slowly, understanding developed. Coalition forces learned why humans fought the way they did. Humans learned that other species had their own strengths, their own ways of warfare that were equally valid. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it transformed into respect. 6 months after the Battle of Talon 7, Lieutenant Kira found herself back on a battlefield. This time she was part of a joint coalition human task force responding to a crisis on the mining colony of Redstone. A pirate fleet had seized control of the colony's orbital platforms, threatening to crash them into the surface if their demands weren't met. Coalition Command had requested human special forces by name. Specifically, they wanted Captain Owen Blake's team. Kira served as liaison officer, coordinating between human and coalition forces. She had trained for this role, studied human military doctrine until she could predict their tactical decisions, and learned to communicate in the direct, efficient style that human soldiers preferred. The transport ship carrying Blake's team docked with the coalition cruiser 2 hours before the planned operation. Kira met them at the airlock, and Blake greeted her with a slight smile of recognition. "Lieutenant Kira, good to see you again. Captain Blake, welcome aboard." She noticed his team was one person short. "I see you have a new member." Blake nodded toward a young man who looked remarkably similar to Leo Grant. "This is Specialist Danny Grant, Leo's younger brother. He completed training 3 months ago and requested assignment to our team." Kira looked at Danny, seeing the same determination in his eyes that Leo had possessed. "Your brother was very brave." "So I've heard," Danny replied quietly. "That's why I'm here. Someone has to carry on what he started." The briefing took place in the operations room. Coalition tactical officers presented the situation. 40 pirates holding 300 hostages across 2 orbital platforms. The pirates had heavy weapons, prepared defensive positions, and had threatened to destroy the platforms if any rescue attempt was detected. "We need to neutralize the threat without alerting them," the coalition commander explained. "Our simulations show this is impossible. We can't approach without being detected. We can't breach without triggering their defenses." Blake studied the tactical display in silence. His team gathered around him, their faces showing the same calm calculation that Kira had learned to recognize. After 5 minutes, Blake spoke. "We can do it, but we'll need support from coalition forces. Specifically, we need a diversion." "What kind of diversion?" "Make them think you're planning a full assault from the main docking ports. Build up forces, create communication traffic, run obvious reconnaissance. Make them focus on the threat they expect while we come in from an angle they won't anticipate." The coalition commander looked skeptical. "Where will you enter?" "The waste disposal system. These platforms vent processed materials into space on a regular schedule. We'll use those vents as entry points." A Sisteri officer raised one of his 4 hands. "Those vents are only open for 30 seconds at a time. The margin of error is too small," Blake smiled. "For you, maybe. We've done tighter insertions." Rita Cross pulled up detailed schematics. "We've identified 4 viable entry points. My team of 3 will take the northern platform. Blake's team takes the southern. We coordinate timing so we're moving simultaneously. Once inside, standard protocol. Silent until impossible, then overwhelming force." Kira noticed Danny listening intently, absorbing every detail. This was his first major operation with the team. She wondered if he felt fear. If he did, his face showed nothing but professional focus. The operation began 6 hours later. Coalition forces staged their obvious assault preparation, drawing pirate attention exactly as planned. Blake's team launched from the cruiser in small insertion pods barely larger than coffins that would be nearly invisible to sensors. Kira monitored everything from the operations room. She watched the pods drift toward the platforms, using minimal propulsion to avoid detection. The timing had to be perfect. If they arrived too early, they would drift in space waiting for the vents to open. Too late, and they would miss their window entirely. 30 seconds to vent cycle. Rita's voice came over the secure channel. Blake's team aligned themselves outside their target vent. They wore specialized suits designed for extreme environment operations. Inside those suits, Kira knew they had weapons, tools, medical supplies, and enough oxygen for 3 hours of operation. "Vent opening now," Blake reported. The team moved with inhuman precision. One by one, they slipped through the opening in the 3 seconds before the vent cycled shut. The last person through was Danny, who cleared the opening with half a second to spare. "All personnel inserted," Blake confirmed, going silent. For the next 40 minutes, Kira could only wait. The humans were inside the platforms, moving through maintenance corridors and service tunnels that barely qualified as passages. They crawled through spaces designed for repair drones, squeezed through gaps that seemed impossible for living beings to navigate. Coalition soldiers watching the operation shook their heads in disbelief. "How do they move through such tight spaces?" one asked. "Humans are flexible," Kira explained. "Their skeletal structure allows significant compression and contortion. It's another evolutionary advantage. They could squeeze through small cave openings when hunting or fleeing from predators." The silent phase ended when Rita's team reached the hostages on the northern platform. One of the pirates had wandered away from his post, stumbling directly into Rita's position. She neutralized him instantly, but not before he triggered a proximity alarm. "Contact," Rita announced calmly. Going loud, both teams shifted from stealth to assault mode simultaneously. The careful, silent infiltration became a lightning raid. Blake's team moved through the southern platform like a storm, engaging pirates with overwhelming force. They used flashbang grenades to disorient defenders, smoke to obscure movement, and precise marksmanship to neutralize threats without endangering hostages. Kira watched the tactical display update in real time. Red markers representing pirates disappeared rapidly. Blue markers showing hostages moved toward safe zones. Green markers tracked the human teams as they cleared room after room. "Northern platform secure," Rita reported 12 minutes after going loud. "All hostages safe. 3 enemy casualties, 7 captured. Southern platform secure," Blake followed 30 seconds later. "All hostages safe. 5 enemy casualties, 12 captured. The entire operation from insertion to completion had taken less than an hour. Coalition forces moved in to secure the prisoners and evacuate hostages. The crisis that could have killed 300 people had been resolved with minimal casualties and no hostage deaths. Back on the Coalition cruiser, Blake's team removed their gear with practiced efficiency. Danny sat quietly, processing his first major operation. His brother Leo had died in combat. Danny had survived his first mission successfully. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. Blake sat beside his newest team member. "You did good work today, Danny. Leo would be proud." "I kept thinking about him in there," Danny admitted, wondering if he felt this scared during operations. He did. "We all do. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you careful. The trick is not letting it control you." Kira approached them, carrying data tablets with operational reports. "Captain, Coalition Command wants to debrief the team. They're calling this operation a perfect execution." "Nothing's perfect," Blake replied. "We got lucky. The pirates weren't as well trained as they could have been. Different enemy, different outcome. You're too modest." Blake stood, stretching muscles that had been compressed in tight spaces for over an hour. "Not modest, Lieutenant, realistic. Every mission succeeds until the one that doesn't. We train for the day when luck runs out and skill is all we have left." Over the following months, joint coalition human operations became routine. More human teams deployed to crisis zones. More coalition officers learned to work with them. The fear never completely disappeared, but it transformed into something more complex. Respect mixed with caution, admiration alongside unease. Kira continued her role as liaison officer, bridging the gap between human and coalition military cultures. She taught coalition soldiers about human capabilities and limitations. She explained the psychological aspects of human warfare, the evolutionary advantages, the cultural factors that shaped their approach to combat. In return, she learned from the humans. She discovered that beneath the efficient killers were people who valued life deeply, who mourned their losses privately, who carried the weight of their actions with quiet dignity. They weren't monsters. They were survivors who had learned to be exceptional at the worst aspects of civilization because someone had to be. One evening, Kira sat with Blake in the observation deck of Station Harmony, watching stars drift past. They had completed another successful mission earlier that day. 0 casualties, all objectives achieved. Just another day's work for human special forces. "Why do you do this?" Kira asked quietly. "You could use your skills for other purposes. Exploration, research, anything besides warfare." Blake was silent for a long moment. "Because someone has to. There are threats in this galaxy that diplomacy can't solve. Pirates who prey on the weak, terrorists who kill for ideology, criminals who profit from suffering. Someone needs to stand between them and innocent people. That's us. That's what we do." "But the cost," Kira said. "Soldiers like Leo, like the ones who die in every conflict. How do you justify that?" "We don't justify it. We just accept it. Every person in Special Forces volunteers knowing the risks. We choose this life because we believe protecting others is worth the sacrifice." Leo understood that. Danny understands it now. We all do. Kira thought about that for a long time. In her months working with human forces, she had seen brutality and compassion existing side by side. She had watched humans kill efficiently and then weep for their enemies. She had witnessed them accept terrible risks to save strangers they would never meet again. "Do you know what my report concluded?" she asked. "After Talon 7? I read it. You called us apex predators with ethics. That's still accurate. You're the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy, and that terrifies other species. But you're also the first ones to run toward danger when someone needs help. You're nightmares and heroes at the same time." Blake smiled slightly. "Good. Let the pirates and terrorists fear us. Let the innocent know they're safe when we arrive. That's the reputation we want." Years later, when Kira had retired from active service and was teaching military history at Coalition Academy, she would tell students about the humans. She would explain why alien soldiers dreaded human special forces. Because humans brought millions of years of predatory evolution to modern warfare. Because they operated in conditions that would kill most species. Because they never quit even when victory seemed impossible. But she always ended her lectures the same way. "Fear them if you must, but respect them always. Because when darkness comes, when danger threatens, when all hope seems lost, human special forces will be there." They'll move through the night like ghosts, fight like demons, and die like heroes if that's what protecting others requires. That's what makes them terrifying. That's also what makes them invaluable. Somewhere in the galaxy, another crisis was developing. Another distress call would go out, and somewhere, a team of human special forces would gear up, check their weapons, and prepare to do what they did best: succeed at impossible missions or die trying. The galaxy had learned to count on them, even while dreading the moment they arrived. Because when you needed miracles, you called for heroes, and humanity had become very good at producing both.